During the 2019 bushfires, they told you that the fires there were unprecedented. Even though Australia had far bigger fires back in 83, at 75, 67, and for centuries prior. In the 1700s, Captain Cook's nickname for Australia was the continent of smoke. I wonder why. The only difference between then and now is that before, there were no cell phone cameras in the middle of the outback, so you didn't see it. Global wildfire activity is actually decreasing. It's only getting worse in the areas that practice aggressive fire suppression, like the American West. But few are eager to tell you the truth. Instead, they tell you the sky is falling like never before, and it's all the fault of our modern, shitty climate. When was the climate not shitty? Was there some magical time in history when droughts didn't exist? When do they think the ideal climate was? 30 years ago? Back in 1991? When the Oakland firestorm killed 25 people and destroyed nearly 3,000 homes and did $2.5 billion of damage in a day? Maybe the ideal climate was 100 years ago, when we didn't have all the pollution and power plants. Back in 1910, when the big blow-up burned 3 million acres across 2 countries in a weekend and killed 86 people? Or was the climate optimum even further back? Way back when the population of the Earth was less than 1 billion people. Less consumers, no SUVs, and hardly a whiff of CO2 in the air. Like in 1871, when the worst wildfire in recorded human history, the Peshtigo Fire, in Wisconsin burned over 1 million acres in a few hours and vaporized more than 2,000 people. They don't even know the death toll within plus or minus 1,000. And the people who fled for refuge in the Peshtigo River boiled alive. And that wasn't even the biggest fire that year. Hell, it wasn't even the biggest fire on that day. The same day, the Great Michigan Fire burned 3 million acres alone. In 2020, California had its biggest fire year in history, with people panicking over the consumption over 4 million acres of vegetation. But in 1871, those 2 fires alone burned more in a single day than California did in the entirety of its worst year. And neither of those 2 fires even have a place in history, because the Great Fire of Chicago ignited on the same damn day. 1871 was a hell of a year.
We'll do it live. Okay. No. We'll do it live! Fuck it. Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live! And things.
Good evening, welcome. Nothing new under the sun, folks. There is nothing new under the sun, except for, did government just illegally dump toxic fire waste from the Palisades fire into Calabasas, Kim Kardashian's neighborhood? This is unacceptable. Is fire season over? Is the climate change debate kaput? Guys, I think it may be. Now, we've got quite a few things to get into, but I want to touch on, before we get into the juicy Kardashian details, because funnily enough, Kim Kardashian is actually involved in this story. Oh man, it is what it is. It's what it is. These are our ambassadors. So let's tackle the issue of whether or not fire season is over. Let's look at what's going on right now. Not much to see. Let's roll it back maybe 6 hours. Let's see what kind of fire activity we're doing. Okay. All right. That just about sums it up. Now, how many times have I been telling you guys that this season ain't it? Obviously, we had horrendous fires in January, and I really believe that there was just not enough toothpaste left in the tube. And that's not a scientific assessment. That's just something that you start to develop over many years, watching these things unfold. You can kind of feel it. The way that a farmer can feel that incoming storm in his bones. It just didn't feel like this was the season. Now, this is a good thing. This is actually a really good thing. It's a good thing for a variety of reasons. Obviously, it's a good thing because we don't have a bunch of stuff on fire. It's also a good thing because this gives us a huge opportunity before winter time to do a lot of burning. So with this huge damper, I won't go so far as to say that fire season is over. This doesn't quite count as a season-ending event, but it is significant. It's very significant to the point where in San Bernardino, where normally this time of year, CAL FIRE BDU is pulling 24-hour shifts on major wildfires, they are now dealing with debris flows and flooding. This is significant. And by the way, I would so much rather deal with fire than water. Water is impossible to manage, but fire is actually pretty easy to manage. It's certainly easy to prevent, but like you can keep your home from burning down pretty easily from a wildfire. But when it comes to water, it will rip your home off the foundation. And it's not just the water, it's what's in the water. You remember that old Ron White joke where he was joking about some Florida guy who was going to, he was really fit. And so he was going to ride out a hurricane. He strapped himself to a telephone pole just to prove how strong he was going to ride out this hurricane. And Ron White had this great line. It's not that the wind is blowing. It's what the wind is blowing. If you get hit by a Volvo, I don't care how many sit-ups you did that particular morning. It's the same with water. If you guys recall the Thomas fire back in 2017, there were a few fatalities on that fire. However, the debris flow in the flooding that occurred afterwards that winter was so much worse. It destroyed a bunch of homes, killed a bunch of people. And, if you guys know the Montecito area, there's tons of boulders up there. So a lot of stuff got dislodged, and you had massive boulders just wiping out homes like dominoes. I would much rather deal with fire than water. Now, active fires, we've got the Garnet fire, 90% contained. That will go up. There's some cool pictures, actually. I got to commend the photographer on this because there's some cool pictures on this incident page. It's a great shot of an engine crew doing some dry mopping. It's nice. Look at this shot. This nighttime silhouette shot. Beautiful shot. I love this. I just wanted to take a little time out and show this. Here, I like how they have to point out it's a female fighter. A female fighter. What is she fighting? Is she fighting females? Sometimes. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to see, what they're doing. They're doing a lot of, this is chipping, so they're rehabbing. The firefight's over with this one, right? If they're at 90% containment, the thing is done. This is a cool shot. This is a smoke jumper that's rappelling and trying to put out or work on a hot spot that got up inside this giant sequoia. Look at this frickin' thing. And it's already got some battle scars on it. It's really interesting to look at these trees and the way that they weather fire. They have blemishes and they endure. And it's really cool. It's really cool to see this. But that actually is a pretty dense canopy. I don't necessarily like seeing that. But, this gives you an idea of kind of what they're dealing with. Most of the forest survived. Some of these trees are probably, I don't know, they don't look too bad. But this is an overly dense forest, right? There's a reason why it burned through here pretty significantly. Notice the amount of saplings here. There's a lot of saplings. Those things need to go. And with regular fire, you don't get that. You just get the big boys. And so if you were to just visually imagine these younger saplings gone, how much more wide open this would be. You wouldn't have all this density right through there, right? That's what it would look like if we were doing routine fire in this area. You'd have a bit more of a blank slate like this. So all these saplings got singed, whereas this tree looks like it survived. And we're going to have a more open forest. The question is, are we going to maintain it? It's like a republic if you can keep it. It's a healthy forest if you can maintain it. Here's Inyo Hot Shots doing some firing. Look at that. Guy's probably got a sick beard that we can't see. It's too bad. So anyway, this thing's for sure wrapped. This thing's done. And I think, honestly, guys, think fire season might be done. This is the perimeter of the Garnet fire. It's all tied in. They've got a ton of black on the map. This thing's done. It's not going anywhere. So, honestly, that's really the only banner fire in existence at this point. So what do we have to talk about anymore? Guys, what are we going to talk about? Fire season's over, man. Again, you could still have a resurgence in October. It's possible. But, I mean, these conditions, when you're getting heavy rainstorms in the middle of September and it's already a slow fire season, look, the plants are still mostly dormant, so you're not necessarily going to get water uptake from this storm. Like I've said a billion times, a heavy rain can help you on the day. It's not necessarily going to help you with fire season, but as you get later into the season, it actually does start to help. Okay, so this storm is going to be significant. We had something similar a few years ago where I think it was in 2022, fire season ended in September. Everybody's looking for a reason to panic. I'm definitely not that guy. And that's why I've been saying, I don't feel it with this fire year. And again, the good news is you could do some burning. You have plenty of time before the snow flies where the conditions are pretty amenable to getting a bunch of prescribed fire done. Will they do it? I think you know the answer to that. The answer is absolutely not. They're not going to do a fucking thing. They never do. Now, what are we going to talk about in the absence of wildfires? Well, we got this. This is really interesting. So I'm going to tie this in, so just bear with me. In an unprecedented move, the California legislature has passed a bill creating a news media subsidy program overseen by Governor Gavin Newsom, which media experts say will discourage news organizations from holding the government accountable and reduce press independence. As if we had any journalists holding this guy accountable in California. Please point out to me, besides like Jen Van Laar and Kenneth, and like the independent journalists, there's nobody in corporate media who holds this guy accountable. And as evidenced by the fact that how many times on my show have we talked about how you guys need to ask what he means when he says treated acres, and no one ever does it. No one ever does it. No one ever asks him, hey, where's all the prescribed fire money actually going since you're not doing it? Hey, where did the Palisades fire start? Nobody ever asked these questions. So now they're going to be dumping $10 million to subsidize these media outlets. Are they ever going to hold him accountable? Of course not. Of course not. What's crazy to me, I picked up this statistic the other day. Gavin Newsom is so interesting, man. When you look at California's population growth over the century, it has only ever gone up. It has only ever gone up every single year until Gavin Newsom arrives. And then all of a sudden, that growth stops. That's never happened in the history of the state. No one has ever had a net zero growth in the state. He did it twice in his 6 years. And what's even worse, he got 1% negative net growth. And since the average growth every year in California is like 1% to 2%, maybe more, that's actually, he lost like 3%. Never seen that. Never ever seen a governor who could convince people to leave paradise. Dude, it's so crazy. But I mean, this is what happens if you keep letting things burn down. So I hope you guys take advantage of this gift that God has given you with this positive weather and do some burning. So next year, you don't have catastrophe. Will they do it? I doubt it. Now, other news with Newsom, he's just appointed his chief climate advisor as the new head of the unelected bureaucratic machine that is the California Air Resources Board. Now, we've talked about CARB quite a bit. Those of you who've seen my film, I pinned a lot of the blame for the lack of prescribed fire in California on the California Air Resources Board because, of course, they have veto power over every firing operation. You have to get your go, no-go permission from CARB. And they veto a lot. They veto a lot. The burn bosses who I talked to candidly on the line, they would tell me that CARB vetoes like 90% of their good burn days. So it is a very oppressive regime that they operate, is a huge hurdle. It's a part of the reason why the feds don't do a lot of burning. Now, I think they kind of just use that as an excuse, like that's their crutch, but it is true. Okay, this is a big problem. And the thing is, this is his like climate czar. So this is going to be someone who's fixated on climate change. Now, we played that clip from my film at the top of the broadcast. And we did that for a reason. The whole climate change debate, I think it's done, guys. I think it's done. Now, the reason I covered climate in my film in that way in particular, it was very deliberate. It was basically to say, I don't really care. It doesn't matter to wildfire, and it really doesn't. It has an impact on wildfire, certainly. But the reason why it doesn't matter is because you can't change it. So what's the point? What's the point of fixating on climate on every article? Yes, it's here. Okay, just in the same way that the sun rises and the sun is up for a certain amount in the day and you have a burn window, okay? That's just a part of reality. So what are you gonna do about it? That's my whole thing. And the other issue is that it's not like there was some magical time in history where there wasn't drought or fire weather. And that's why I wanted to go back in time, because people will always say, oh, the climate was so much better before we had all this CO2 in the air. Okay, it didn't matter for fires because clearly the biggest fires in history were 150 years ago, right? You point me to any year that you think, we should go back in time to with the CO2 levels, and I'll point out to you a fire that destroyed people's lives. And that was my whole point in saying that, like, you guys want to do all the climate stuff, you want to do the EVs, if you think that helps. I don't think it does. But if you do think that helps, I fully support it. Go for it. Just stop wasting your time when it comes to wildfire, because people get so distracted with the EVs and the solar panels and whinging about climate and like going to Greta protests and stuff like this, that they're not spending that time and that money on clearing their brush. Well, that's changing, guys. We won. Showed you this post. This is from a few days ago. This is MRCA Parks showing off that they're doing fuels clearance in Topanga Canyon, where every day for the last, 3 months now on this broadcast, I've been bitching about this. You guys need to start clearing fuels around Topanga. They brought in the goats, and then we have this. This we covered yesterday. The city of Malibu joins LA County to establish a bold wildfire prevention pilot program to get rid of fuels around Malibu and Topanga. We love it. Every day there's more and more fuels reduction. Then we have this today.
Never been to Palisades before, but after coming here, it's kind of sad that some of the houses are burnt down. Even the trees are still burnt down. But slowly, you can see them growing.
Pay my respect, my condolences to those who lost their homes, and trying to make the community better, restoring the trails, and just trying to make it beautiful again.
We're on this project to clear out some of the vegetation, any dry fuels to prevent any wildfires, and also increasing the activity for any hikers, any park goers, increasing the trail all the way down to the beach.
It protects the communities and the animals that live here. I decided to join the Corps because I wanted to make a better life for myself and my family. I'm looking forward to getting to Caltrans full time, so I'm just trying to work hard and learn what I can learn from the Corps and learn from my elders and peers, and hopefully one day I'll be in Caltrans.
I love the music on that. Just lifts the spirits. Guys, what are you noticing? What are you noticing? We've got 3 days in a row. They're posting about clearing fuels over and
Never
over.
been to Palisades before.
Nothing but clearing fuels. Are they talking about climate at all? We won. Guys, it has been a long, tedious road. And, I finished my film back in 2021. That was like the peak woke hysteria period. It was a very challenging time to look like me trying to sell something in Hollywood, especially when your film doesn't give a shit about the climate change debate and just skips right past it. But I took a lot of slings and arrows over the years from people constantly panicking about climate, and constantly every single discussion about wildfire has to link it to climate change. And so what you get is you get residents in the Palisades who are being good little boys, following the lead of people like Gavin Newsom, and they're buying their Teslas, they're putting up their solar panels, they're drinking out of their paper straws, they're doing all the things. But what's the one thing they weren't doing? What these gentlemen are doing in this video. That's the one thing that actually would have saved them from the wildfire, and they didn't do it. because they were too busy doing the climate things. And the thing is, guys, California has done all the climate things. They've done all the climate things. For how long? It doesn't work. The fires are only getting worse. I think they're finally starting to get it. Okay, we tried just doing climate stuff. We tried the whole, hey, let's buy enough Teslas to make the weather less angry. Doesn't work, guys. Doesn't work. Clear your brush. That's it. Like, how many times did I say that in Hotshot? Clear your brush. It works. To see that now, this is the media that's coming out. It's just fuels clearance. It's just fuels clearance. We won. We won. This debate is over. We have finally entered into an era of appropriate forest stewardship and land management. And obviously, the proof's going to be in the pudding. How much are they actually going to do? But in terms of winning the culture war and the PR battle, we won. We won. This shit is over. We're not doing this stuff anymore. We're not going to waste time with the climate stuff when it comes to wildfire. Okay? We're going to clear our fuels. I think enough people have burned out. They've been burned out of their neighborhoods to finally accept the reality that you can't solar panel your way out of this. And especially given the fact that this is what happens when all that stuff inevitably burns. Firefighters who battled the Palisades and Eaton wildfires show significantly elevated levels of lead and mercury in their blood, according to a new multi-university study. No one is following up on this, by the way. I have pictures that were sent to me privately of firefighters who have lost all their hair. That is an indicator of heavy metal poisoning. And that's just from doing a couple of shifts, a couple of operational shifts with all of these green technologies that got liquefied and aerosolized from that fire, which could have been prevented not by Teslas and solar panels, but brush clearance. Spencer actually made a really good point on this, or he highlighted it. Someone should tell the new carb chair that none of these policies matter when Newsom lets his state park dead brush burn entire towns to the ground. No amount of electric cars or stoves helps the air when Newsom lets them all burn. And this is the key point here. We've talked about this. California wildfires have released an estimated 253 million metric tons of CO2 into the atmosphere since Gavin became governor, based on annual estimates from the California Air Resources Board from 2019 to 2023. So that's not even counting all of the structures that went up in January of this year. And extrapolations using burned acreage and average emission factors for 2024 and 2025 year to date. This is equivalent to the annual CO2 emissions from approximately 55 million passenger vehicles, using the EPA's estimate of 4.6 metric tons of CO2 per typical vehicle per year. All of that effort to green up California is wasted when you don't clear your brush. By pursuing all of this stuff with the electric everything, and all of this stuff just burns up and turns the place into a Superfund site anyway. Now, on that point, what happened with all of that toxic debris? Where did it go? We talk about the record cleanup that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers came in and did. Where did all the debris go? Well, as it turns out, it went to Kim Kardashian's backyard. This is from the New York Times. Let me see if I can pull this up for you guys. It might be behind a paywall, but I'm going to try. Bang. Is that showing up for you guys? Look at how they framed this article, by the way. My goodness. How a ritzy LA enclave learned a bitter lesson about the limits of its wealth. This is the headline. Guys, let's do a little thought exercise. Let's say you were a newspaper editor for the paper of record, and you were doing an article about how Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass and the federal government pushed a whole bunch of toxic fire debris into a neighboring city that shouldn't have been receiving that stuff and wasn't notified about it. What's your headline going to be? What's your headline going to be if government pushed a whole bunch of toxic fire debris onto unwilling civilians in the middle of this neighborhood in California? By the way, the funny thing is, because I will tell you, my headline wouldn't be about the limits of its wealth. They have to turn it into some commie gobbledygook. Notice all the solar panels on these houses, by the way. But look at this pool in the backyard. That is an above ground pool. You can get one of those for like $1,000 at Costco. This is not a ritzy area. Now, there are areas of Calabasas that, of course, have the Kardashians, super wealthy. My wife used to teach there. She actually taught Kevin Hart's kids. This whole area isn't ritzy. And this neighborhood, ironically, that they're showing in the picture is not ritzy at all. Okay? And this is the frustrating mistake that they made about the Palisades, reporting on the Palisades as well. You know, people like in my family who are like surviving just off Social Security, and they're treating everybody like they're fucking billionaires. And oh, they'll be fine. They got plenty of money. Really? All right. But what's interesting about this article, you know, obviously there's a lot of you know, typical New York Times stuff. But rather than try to push you through all of this, I just found some highlights that I wanted to show you. Let me see if there's any interesting pictures. Some people protesting, please no poison on my playground, no fire waste in residential communities. You got kids here. We already know that the firefighters are suffering. We've got all kinds of new cancers from beryllium poisoning. Now, this is a wordy article, dude. And here's a picture of Kourtney Kardashian. Look how chic she looks. Protect Calabasas, no toxic fire waste. Man, you know if the Kardashians are involved, it's serious. But this actually is serious. But I wanted to point out this. Okay? This is how they started the article. The Los Angeles fires were one of the most destructive wildfire events in California's history. They were also among the most predictable. Now you think, exactly. I've been predicting it for God knows how long. I predicted it in my film. This is why we got so much attention after the fires, by the way. And then they go on to say, the hots are getting a lot hotter. Dries are getting a lot drier. The wets are getting a lot wetter. That's climate change. Just when I thought we were done with this, just when I thought we'd gotten rid of this stupid narrative. So they're saying, yes, these fires were very predictable, but they're saying because of climate change. They can't help themselves. It was predictable because the place hadn't burned in 40 years and they didn't clear any brush. That's why it's predictable. And that was Governor Gavin Newsom more than 5 years ago, after a different, only somewhat less catastrophic fire. A Los Angeles County report the same year concluded that 386 square miles of the county lay in a very high fire hazard severity zone and projected that climate change would make those fires more frequent and chaotic. What? Chaotic? Is that a scientific term? The pseudoscience that these people get away with is insane. Now, what makes a very high fire hazard severity zone? Is it the amount of CO2 in the air? Is that what makes it a very high fire hazard severity zone? Any of you guys who live in Southern California, do you know what makes it a high fire hazard severity zone? It's the terrain and it's the fuels. That's it. That's what makes it a high fire hazard severity zone. Okay? It's not the fucking climate. I'm so sick of this. So let's go on. Yet the images of the flaming metropolis, the eradicated acres, the incandescent grid seen from orbit, the Hollywood sign engulfed by smoke, seem to inaugurate a new category of climate disaster. See, this putting everything on climate, it's this get out of jail free card. If you say this is climate, then you're never going to say it's the state park didn't remove any fuels. And so this is why the climate thing drives me crazy. It's not because I'm against the whole climate change thing. It's because it's a disempowering narrative. If you pin it on climate change, it's like you might as well be pinning it on aliens, right? We have no agency over that. And that's my problem, is it removes our agency. If you blame everything on climate, you have no impact on that. You cannot have a direct impact on that. But if you understand that it has to do with the fuels around your home, you actually can have an impact on that. That is an empowering narrative. And you can stop tomorrow's wildfire right now with a chainsaw. Not an electric one that you're forced to have in California, like a real one. This is why the whole climate thing drives me crazy. The fact that they continue to pump this, somebody clearly did not inform them that the climate debate is kaput, right? We've killed it. Here we go. Seems to inaugurate a new category of climate disaster, one that might be too expensive to overcome, even for the world's richest society. Just to make sure it's about class warfare here. But it could try. In the case of the 2.6 million tons, at least, somebody in a position of influence at the state or federal level, the person's identity may never be publicly known. hit upon an ingenious solution. The fire ash would simply not be tested for hazardous compounds. If you didn't test the ash, you couldn't prove it was toxic. And without evidence of toxicity, all the ash could be shipped immediately to the nearest residential landfill. Now, this is a damning claim. This is a very vague but damning claim. The New York Times is claiming that somebody, an individual, is culpable for deliberately bypassing the legal requirement to test fire ash from a catastrophic urban conflagration. So they're saying there is a person, whether at the state or federal level, and their identity may never be publicly known. So this is someone in a dark, smoky room who came up with an ingenious... They're crowded around with a bunch of Mr. Burns types saying, oh, I know how we'll get these silly peasants. We won't test it. That's ingenious. The fire ash would simply not be tested for hazardous compounds. Now, do they have any evidence of this? They haven't presented that. But this is a very bold claim. They're pinning it onto somebody, an individual, in a position of influence. And again, using those words, man, if I were their editor, I would never let this fly. This is such hack journalism. To say someone in a position of influence is about as vague as you could put it, right? What's influence? Is that a bureaucrat? Is that a politician? Is that a wealthy donor? Is that a celebrity? Is that a friend of the governor? Right? Is that the governor's first partner? All of these people are in positions of influence. But what accountability is there for that? My goodness. So they're saying that one person decided that they weren't going to test the ash that was obviously toxic because of all the green stuff, the solar panels and the Teslas and the power walls that all burned up and poisoned the area and turned it into a Superfund site. And they're going to just dump this onto a residential landfill in Calabasas. And that was because one individual decided, hey, we're just going to put the blinders on and we're going to dump it, even though we know that it's toxic. That sounds like Dr. Evil levels of sinister, nefarious behavior. And yet, later on in the article, they contradict themselves, where they say, although the Calabasas landfill was not permitted to accept hazardous waste, it was authorized to accept fire debris. The authorization dated to a 2008 emergency proclamation by Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger that allowed wildfire debris to be sent to lined Class 3 landfills, among them Calabasas. This was already adjudicated in court. So if they have the authority to dump fire debris because of this authorization that dates back to 2008, now the thing is, you don't have to test fire debris to know that it's toxic. It is toxic. Why do you think firefighters wear SCBAs when they do structure defense? Why do they do that? Why do they do that when they're battling a car fire? Why do they do that? It's because it's toxic. You don't have to be a rocket surgeon to know that when a Tesla burns, it's toxic, okay? They know that it's toxic. Why do you think they went through toxic remediation with the EPA for 2 months? They know that it's toxic. So by default, if you are authorizing fire debris from a wildfire to be shipped off, because we're not talking about, Schwarzenegger is not authorizing, taking burned logs to be chipped and then put into landfills. We're talking about structures that have lead in them and asbestos and vehicles and batteries and all kinds of toxic materials. So of course it's toxic. So by default, they've already said that this is authorized by the state. So A, it's not illegal. You can change that law, and you probably should, because we know that it's just a couple of days of exposure to this is already giving firefighters cancer. Already. Look at what happened to Fernie on Texas Canyon Hot Shots. Just one day on the IA on the Eaton fire in Altadena, and he's got a mass in his lung a few months later. So if it's doing it to these guys after 1 or 2 days of exposure, what's it going to do to these kids in this neighborhood with prolonged exposure for God knows how long? And remember September 11th, guys. Do you know how many firefighters died after the towers came down? Because they were in there in that toxic debris trying to find and rescue their brothers and get out their remains. And they're still dying to this day. So of course, this is going to kill people. Of course, it's going to give them cancer. This is like the Aaron Brockovich thing of our time. Dude, every time Spencer goes back to his house in the Palisades, the footprint of his house, to do his podcast, he breaks out in hives all over the place because the soil is so toxic. And people who don't believe him, like there's been a couple of reporters who came out and spent the day with him. And at the end of the day, they're like, dude, I was hacking up a lung at the end of the day. You weren't kidding. I thought you were like totally embellishing. This is a real thing. So now the issue of dumping all this stuff in Calabasas, this is not the result of some individual in a position of influence saying, just don't test it. This is the fact that this was already authorized since 2008. And it's too late. It's too late. They already dumped that stuff there. So I don't know how they're going to remediate this, but this is a huge problem. It's a huge problem. And this is something that people need to figure out moving forward because, of course, this is going to happen over and over again. As Sue Thompson said, fire history and fire frequency. That's your indicator of how predictable a fire is. Have you seen it before? And when was the last time it happened, right? So if you've seen a fire here before and it was 40 years ago and your fire cycle is every 25 years, that's your mean fire return interval, and you haven't seen that fire for 40 years, it's coming. Remember this lady?
How long have you lived in the Palisades? And have you?
I grew up here, 1965.
Wow. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
1979, same fire. Yeah.
So this is a repeat of 1979.
Yep. I think that's the last time that it burned. Yep.
Aaron, we thank you for talking to us, and we're wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
please
very
stay
much.
safe.
Thank you.
Did she say, well, I knew this. Yeah, I've seen this before because the climate. What do you think the climate was like back in the 60s? You know, we're always shown that hockey stick graph that a man with my namesake, unfortunately, has foisted upon the naive public. This, hockey stick graph, and that's just in the last 30 years. Okay, so how do you explain this lady telling us that we had the same fire 40 years ago? How do you explain that? Guys, fires existed since the beginning of time, and they're gonna exist forever. As the great and powerful Diane Cotter says in the comment section, we watched the fires from New Hampshire. We were stunned at the amount of dry brush right up against the homes. And it is pretty staggering. It's actually very staggering. Like, this is what she's talking about, by the way. All of this, all of that dry brush right up against the neighborhood to the point where there's like literally no physical separation. I'm trying to find, there's one angle where she gets a good shot of it. But man, it couldn't be more obvious. And this is really what you have to do. By all means, do all the climate stuff, but just have no illusions about it helping you with wildfires. You're not paying the meter on preventing wildfires by buying more Teslas. Okay? Look at that. Look at how all the fuels are right up against this home in that lower left. It's so crazy to me that people still blame climate when they leave their neighborhood in this condition. It's unbelievable. Anyway, I'm going to keep bitching about it until they get their act together. But like I said, I'm encouraged by the fact that all we're seeing now is people eager to advertise doing fuels reduction. They're not doing CO2 reduction. I mean, they're doing carbon reduction, but that's by getting rid of plants. And the thing is, they're going to have to burn it. So this is why the whole like chasing down carbon emissions thing, especially in California, it's like whack-a-mole. Because in order to protect yourselves from wildfire and prevent that catastrophic urban conflagration where you get all of this crazy stuff, you got to burn it. You got to burn it. So you're going to be releasing carbon. I'm sorry, you have to do it. But the intensity of a prescribed fire is so much lower, and the smoke that comes out of it is really not that bad. Like there is some fine particulates that come out of it, but just go inside. Go inside, have a HEPA filter on your home, you're good. Right? Our barefoot ancestors managed to live here for 12,000 years. I think we can do the same thing. All right, guys. Short and sweet today. There's not a whole lot. Dude, we've got fire season's over. I think it's over, guys. Again, you could still get something slip through the cracks in October, November, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get more moisture. You know, it's been pretty clear from most of this year that it's just not going to be a massive fire season. So what does that tell us? That tells us we need to be doing prescribed fire, because if your fire season ends early, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have smoke in the air up until the snow flies. You should, right? So all of that stuff needs to burn, whether it's accidentally, and unplanned like a wildfire, or we're doing it deliberately. Either way, you got to have smoke going until the snow flies. Okay, that's what California needs. In 2020, we got 4.5 million acres of wildfire. That's how much fire we're supposed to get every year, right? So every year that you're not getting 4.5 million acres, whether through prescribed fire or wildfire, you're building up that fire debt. And that means you got to catch up, okay? So this is not a time where we say, okay, well, we've had 500,000 acres. That's a nice light year. Cool, let's pack it in and count our blessings. No, now's the time to get to work. So now that you had this wedding rain, people need to be working very diligently to get a lot of fire on the ground and spend the next several months trying to get, see if they can get like 1 million acres. If they can do that, then we're in pretty good shape. It's a good start. It's a good start. So I'm glad to see the narrative is shifting. No one is bothering, except for the New York Times, but who cares about the New York Times? Nobody except the New York Times is talking about climate when it comes to wildfires anymore. They're just talking about fuels reduction. So just take that as a little white pill. We can make a difference, right? If we continue to be loud about this narrative and just show up with the basic facts, we can actually turn the narrative, and it's finally happening. So I'm grateful to see that. Unfortunately, it's on the heels of people getting so rocked by wildfires that they've got nothing left. They've got nothing left. And so it's sort of like an alcoholic hitting rock bottom, where they're finally like, all right, this ain't working. We tried all the climate stuff. We tried all the paper straws. Gavin Newsom's had 6 years to try to turn this around. He's clearly not doing it. So we need to do something else. So one thing I'll caution is, he's got a climate activist going to CARB. Look, I don't think that we should be getting rid of air resources boards. I think it's important to have clean air. But the idea that carbon emissions should be like the beating heart of that, I think is ridiculous. Again, for what we just talked about, you have to have some liberated carbon. Otherwise, you're never going to have a safe wildfire environment, and you're never going to have a healthy forest. So carbon shouldn't be at the forefront. Other pollutants, right? Especially like the ones that are coming up from these conflagrations that started because we didn't get rid of enough carbon, right? So that's my big concern with that lady going in, is she's going to be centering CO2 with the Air Resources Board. And I don't think the Air Resources Board should be in any way concerned about CO2. It's not their job. They should be worried about clean air, and CO2 does not make dirty air. It just means more plant food, right? That's it. So if those plants are chomping up a whole bunch of CO2, that means you got to be extra diligent about doing fuel clearance, right? And that's the thing I always say. If you guys are worried about CO2 emissions, just know that CO2 emissions leads to more fuel growth. So that just validates my argument that this needs to be the priority at all times. Getting rid of the fuels, all right? Work extra hard on it. Screw the Teslas. Like, look, we have an EV. We love it. It's a Cadillac, a Lyric. It's an awesome car. We just don't have any illusions that we're saving the planet with it. Some child slave in the Congo had to pick cobalt out of the ground with his fingers, and he's going to die from cancer. That's not saving the planet, because that cobalt then had to get shipped across the world on a diesel-powered freight carrier. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's not saving the world at all. It's just laundering those emissions, right? There's still, tons of emissions from producing that battery. It's just laundered. And because nothing comes out of our tailpipe, we get to pat ourselves on the back and think, oh, it's super clean, disregarding the fact that they dumped God knows how many tons of CO2 in the air just to produce that thing. Best thing you can do is just take your whatever vehicle you have and just ride it until it's dead. Don't buy a car every 3 years. I'm a big fan of reducing and reusing. I'm a big fan of all that stuff. I am a bleeding heart, liberal environmentalist guy, but I'm also a realist, So my wife and I have no illusions when we're driving our car, our sick EV. We have no illusions that it's like saving the planet. We just like it. It's really cool. And the acceleration on that thing is absolutely nuts. Sue Thompson says, did they ever clean up the Santa Susana mess from 2018? No, of course not. Of course not. It's only getting attention now because it fell in the lap of the Kardashians. That's it. That's it. You know, I hate to be cynical, but that's what it takes. You know, it took Spencer Pratt to speak up for the Palisades. And I guess that's what we need. We need reality stars to speak up for us because no one else is going to listen. So it's only because the Kardashians are raising a stink that this might get addressed. But I think it's already baked in the cake, guys. Like them trying to dig that out of the landfill at this point and remediate that, it's just gonna send more of this stuff in the air. This is why California is so screwed. It just seems like they're constantly making the wrong move all the time. All the people in leadership are making the wrong move. It's crazy. So yeah, sorry to end it on a black pill like that, but reality stars saving the day. You know, if the Kardashians do one thing, bringing attention to all this toxic waste that's burning up from all the green materials in these fires, you know, all the solar panels and the Teslas and stuff that are burning up. If they do one good thing in their lives, maybe that's it. All right, guys, remember, in this dystopian world of AI, the only way to prove that you're human